So so I said an order block is an area in the market where there are a lot of institutional orders. What I mean by that is the zone where institutional traders place their buy or sell limit or stop orders or their other limit orders. That's what an order block is. And a breaker block is a failed order block. It means an order block that failed to hold. So, for example, for each trend the market is making, there's always an order block on the downside that's pushing market to the upside, and then a breaker block that market is breaking for an uptrend. So this, for example, this is another block that push market up. This is another block also that's supposed to push market down, but market broke past it. Also another block here that pushed market up. Another block that market is supposed to push down from, but market broke past it. So this is the breaker block here, where market is breaking from. That zone that's supposed to push market to the opposite side, but failed to hold. So, like I said, an order block is a failed order block. So, for example, if we are expecting to take a buy from this order block here, for example, and market comes here and actually breaks past this order block. This order block is no longer an order block, it's now a breaker block, meaning that there's a possibility that market will now come and use this order block to actually continue that direction that it broke. Same as for buys. Same as for sales. If you're looking for sales from this bearish order block, the market came here and broke past that order block. There's every possibility that market to retest this other block that was broken to now continue the buy that it broke into. So a failed order block is what a breaker block is. Now, how do you know when to make use of which POI? How to know when to make use of the other block and how to know when to make use of the breaker block? So there are four key rules I pay attention to when picking a point of interest so that I can know how to pick the valid one. So number one rule that I pay attention is it has to trigger a shift in market structure or a break of structure. You have to make sure that your point of interest triggers a shift in market structure or a break of structure. So while finding those rules, I'll be giving an example with a trade I took. So you have to make sure that your point of interest triggers a shift in market structure or a break of structure. So for this particular trade that I took here, you have to notice that there was a shift in market structure right here. For each rule that I call out, I'm going to demarcate it here on the chart. So there was a shift in market structure right here. MSS. And the second rule says it has to have liquidity or inducement protecting it. Now, like I said, the inducement is the first valid pullback that market makes after a shift of market structure or a break of structure. So where is our liquidity? Our liquidity is right here because it's the pullback that market makes after a shift of market structure or a break of structure. So this is our inducement. Now pay attention to this chart. Yeah, there's actually a breaker block right here. A breaker block is a failed order block. So this is another block that was supposed to hold market for buys. Well, actually, market came here and broke past it. So this is a breaker block, and then our point of interest is our other block right here. So this is the other block, and then this is the breaker block. So this is our breaker block here, and this is our other block. So the first rule says it has to trigger a shift in market structure or a break of structure. The second rule says it has to have liquidity protecting it. The third rule now says it needs to be unmitigated. Now, what proper mitigation is after markets breaking structure or having a shift in market structure, the market's coming back to tap into a point of interest. That is what mitigation is. Mitigation is only valid when it happens after a break of structure or after a market structure. So, for example, this is our other block right here, and the market breaks past that zone, and market breaks past that zone. After breaking past it, the market now comes back to touch the point of interest before moving. This is what the mitigation is. But in a case where this is our point of interest and market breaks past this zone while touching it, this is not mitigation. Mitigation only happens after market breaks structure or shift structure, then comes back to tap into a point of interest. That is what mitigation is. So the third rule says it needs to be unmitigated. It means after market has broken structure, or after there's a shift in market structure, that point of interest they're looking to pick has to not have been tapped into before. Price needs to not have tapped this point of interest before. That's what I mean. So the fourth rule now says it has to be the point of interest that is closest to liquidity. These are the rules I pay attention to while picking a point of interest. If you actually obey all these rules, it's hard for you to take a loss on a trade. So first one, it has to trigger a shift in market structure or a break of structure. Our trade literally has a shift in market structure. Second rule is it has to have a liquidity or inducement protecting it. There's inducement here, there's a liquidity. Third rule, it needs to be unmitigated. And this is where it comes in. Now, this is our breaker block, this is our other block. But this is our breaker block. Because remember, I said mitigation is when market price comes to tap a point of interest after a shift of market structure. This is our breaker block right here, and this is our other block. But after the shift of market structure, market actually came back to tap into this breaker block, meaning that this breaker block has now been mitigated, now disqualifying it from our point of interest that we can use to take a trade. So the fourth one now says it needs to be the point of interest that is closest to liquidity. So what is our liquidity? Our liquidity is this inducement. And which point of interest is closest to it? Other block. That was why I took my entry from this other block. But in a scenario when you have to use a breaker block for a trade, let's assume, let me draw that as a diagram. Let's assume that let's assume that market breaks past a zone. This is our breaker block right here, the zone that market broke past. And this is our other block down here, zone that market, that pushed market. Also, the other block is here, the breaker block is here. This is your breaker block, and then this is your other block. Now, knowing when to use a breaker block or knowing when to use an other block, use a breaker block when the first pullback that market makes did not mitigate that breaker block. I don't know if you understand what I mean. Remember, one of the rules says the point of interest needs to be unmitigated. Now, let's take a scenario like this. Market breaks past this zone, meaning that there's a breaker block right here. Since there's a breaker block right here, then let's say that this is the first pullback that market makes. This is the first pullback that market makes. After that, it pushes up. Eventually, if market should come back to tap into a point of interest, don't pick your entry from this breaker block because this first pullback actually mitigated this breaker block, meaning that it tapped this breaker block or went so the breaker block was mitigated. That's why you use your other block and take a trade. So, but in a case where the first pullback that market makes after the structure shift or break of structure is something like this, don't mitigate this breaker block and pushes up. Eventually, if market is going to pick an entry, your entry will not be this other block. Your entry will have to be this breaker block. Because why? One of the rules says it has to be the point of interest that is closest to liquidity. And I said my liquidity is my inducement. And in this case, the inducement is this. So which point of interest is now closest to liquidity? That is this breaker and not this other block. So the only time you pick your breaker block as an entry is when the inducement did not mitigate the breaker block. But if the inducement mitigated the breaker block, like touched it or went deep inside it, you're picking your point of interest. You pick the other point of interest that is not the breaker. So each point of interest you're picking has to be unmitigated. So I want to give an example with a trade I actually took the breaker block. Okay, yeah, this trade right here, 2 hours time frame. So if you pay attention to this trade, now if you pay attention to this trade, time frame. So if you pay attention to this trade right here, this was a shift in market structure because market was on a downtrend. You can see lower highs and lower lows, lower highs and lower lows. And then markets came here and broke past this last low, causing a shift in market structure right here. So after the shift of market structure, markets made this first pullback, which is this inducement right here on 1 hour time frame. This is an inducement. This is our inducement right here. Let's pullback that market makes after the shift in market structure. So the full pullback, this is our breaker block here. Remember, if you're marking a breaker block, you mark from the body. This is our breaker block right here. And then for our other block is actually down here. There's another block down here. So now there's another block here. There's a breaker block here. Both of them are point of interest. But if you pay attention to the rules that was given to putting a point of interest, it says number one, that's to trigger a shift in market structure or a break of structure. Here we have our shift in market structure right here. Second rule says it is to have liquidity protect liquidity or inducement. Our inducement is present. Third rule says the point of interest needs to be unmitigated, meaning that price needs to not have touched that point of interest after the shift in market structure or break of structure. The inducement is right here. Our breaker block was never mitigated during the first pullback. So this breaker block is valid to be used as entry, and this other block down here is so valid to be used as entry. But which one are you going to pick? You're not going to pick the one that is unmitigated, meaning, sorry, you're not going to pick the one that is closest to liquidity. So where is our liquidity? This inducement. So our inducement is right here. That's our liquidity. Our breaker block is here. Another breaker block is also here, and then the other block is down here. Which point of interest are you going to use? You're going to obviously make use of the one that is closest to our inducement, which is this breaker block. This is why I took this trade from this breaker block right here. So the only time that you could have taken this trade from this other block is if market actually did this as the structure shifts, and then this was the pullback. After that, it moved up. If market should come back to pick a point of interest, we'll pick this other block because it's the closest one to liquidity. Because all these other ones have been mitigated during that first pullback. So knowing these four rules will tell you when to pick an order block as your entry or when to pick a breaker block as your entry. I want to go to gold. I think on 1 hour time frame, I think breaker block entries will be here. I don't see. I will look for the old charts. Okay. Okay. So this particular trade right here now, straight. This is a resistance level. And then if you pay attention here, you can actually see our breaker block here. So this is another block that was supposed to hold markets from buying, like supposed to reverse market here. So this is another block right here. So if you're picking an entry, we'll be waiting for this other block right here. This is another block. But markets came here and broke past it. This is a break of structure. After the break of structure, the first pullback that market makes is right here. This is our inducement. This is our inducement right here. But if you pay attention, this inducement never mitigated this our breaker block because since market broke past this other block now, it's no longer an other block but a breaker block. So if you pay attention, there's another block down here that people wanted to take their trade off of. There's another block right here. But at the same time, there's a breaker block up here. Knowing the one to use is now by following up all these rules. Remember, the first rule says there has to be a break of structure or a market structure shift. Pay attention here. There's a break of structure clear here. Second rule says it has to have liquidity protecting it. Liquidity is this our first pullback, which is this inducement. The third rule says it needs to be unmitigated. It means price needs to not have tapped that breaker block. This breaker or that other block, the point of interest needs to not have been tapped before. This is the other block right here. This is our breaker block. The breaker block has not been tapped. The other block has not been tapped. Both of them are valid to be used as entry. But now the fourth rule now says it has to be the point of interest closest to liquidity. Where is our liquidity? This inducement. Now between these 2 points of interest, the breaker block and the other block, which one is closest to liquidity? Is the breaker block. So that was why I took my entry off of this breaker block. I think I used this trade to take I took this trade and I think I took this trade with $100. I think I turned the $100 to $2,000. If once you are precise with your entries, so I can find the trade. This was the trade actually. I think yeah, this was the trade. Yeah, this was the yeah, this was the trade, I think. Yeah. $299 and then to $2,000 for this particular trade. Because I knew that I'm precise with my entry. And if you pay attention, once price tapped into that breaker block, it started reversing immediately. There was no drawdown on the trade or any kind of loss, because you have to pay attention to know which point of interest you're going to make use of them, maximize your this thing, your losses if you want to. People are flipping accounts or all these things. But you have to pay attention to know which point of interest you're going to use by paying attention to all these rules. Get these rules down. Take a screenshot or write it down. Yeah, it has to trigger a shift of market structure or break of structure. It has to have liquidity or inducement protecting it. It needs to be unmitigated. It has to be the point of interest closest to the. Pay attention to this rule. We hardly lose these setups. So most people now would have been waiting to take their trade from this other block. Most people that trade only other blocks, but they will be ignored. Why? Because the breaker block is clearly the one closest to inducement or to liquidity. Same as this trade. I think this one was on the 45 minutes time frame that I got it. Same as this trade. So this is an order block right here for taking sales in the market. This is the order block for taking a sell in the market. This, and then there was a break of structure, market breaking past a resistance level here. After there was a break of the resistance level, after market broke past this resistance level, it made an inducement. That's a pullback, which is this week right here. This week is the pullback that market made. This is our inducement right here. Our market is IND. It's our inducement right here. So there's another block down here. There's also another block down here too. So which point of interest are we going to use? The first rule, there should be a break of structure or a market stress shift. Yeah, we have it. You should have liquidity protecting it. We have the liquidity, which is this inducement. Third rule, it needs to be unmitigated. This breaker block has not been tapped before after the shift of market structure or break of structure. It was not tapped. The other block was also not tapped after the shift of market structure. But which point of interest are we going to use? The fourth rule, we pay attention to it. That should be the point of interest that is closest to liquidity. That was why this breaker block was used as entry here. And then when price started reversing. I think I have the trade for 9 them. So let me see if I can find this. Actually, this was the trade. So this was the when there was a shift of structure, the inducement, and I picked my entry from the breaker block. So the same trade here. So once I want to follow up all these rules as it should be, you hardly take a loss with this setup. Now, once you understand other criteria again, like once you have class on liquidity, knowing one market has swept liquidity. For example, there's a trade that people are looking for buys on GJ this recent week as from this zone and looking for general buys. But I knew that market has taken out liquidity and now market should be bearish and start selling. So most people that were looking for buys from this breaker block will be taken out. Understand? But they will say, oh, this it obeys all the rules they're supposed to, but not forgetting that there are other factors into this analysis. There's market structure, liquidity, and point of interest. So liquidity controls most of this. When it comes to liquidity, that's the next class I will take. Liquidity. Once this is what fuels the market. Once liquidity has been taken out from one side of the market, it's headed to the other side. So if this recent side liquidity has been taken, that's this buy side liquidity. It's not heading for the sell side liquidity. That was why I was bearish on GG. So But this knowing when to pick between an order block and a breaker block, you need to pay attention to all these four criteria. That's why I have a shift in market structure. That's why I have liquidity protecting it. It needs to be unmitigated. It now has to be the point of interest closest to liquidity. Meaning that you can only use the order block if your breaker block was mitigated. If your breaker block it was unmitigated, you have to pick your entry from the breaker block because it will be the closest one to liquidity. So that's just it. No, you want to use breaker block, you want to use other blocks. The reason why, okay, let me see if I have a trade with another block. So I have an trade with another block. Let me now tell you so you know that when to use another block. This also is also a breaker block trade. And most of the charts, really. Let me just draw it out as a diagram for you. I think I have something else into the Telegram group regarding the strategy. That's a diagram of you want to use a breaker block and you want to use another block, which is this. I'll forward it to the Telegram. You guys can see. So it's basically this market break structure, or there's a shift in market structure, and the first pullback does not mitigate the breaker. If you're picking your entry will be from the breaker. But if there's a shift in market structure, a breaker structure, and the first pullback actually touches the breaker or goes above or below the breaker, if you're picking your entry will be from the other block. So you're only making unmitigated point of interest. Once one point of interest has been mitigated, you're going to pay attention to the next one that is closest to liquidity. So that is just it for breaker blocks. So I'm accepting questions now. If you have any questions regarding what I thought, you can ask. Chimobi Stephen, I have a question. Chimobi, unmute yourself. Say you have a question, Chimobi Stephen. I'm asking you to unmute yourself.
Chairman, it was a mistake. Oh, it was a mistake. It was a mistake.
Okay, how I know GJ is bearish. There are actually different types of not talked about types of liquidity yet, but there are actually different types of liquidity. There's trend line liquidity. There is an equal highs and equal lows liquidity. There's now long week liquidity. So you pay attention to GJ. There was a long week on 4 hours time frame, a long week here, which is I think right here. Let me open up GJ. 4 hours time frame. Yes, this week on GJ. This is a long week on GJ. This is a high that has to be taken out on GJ. So this is literally liquidity. It's a long week liquidity. So after market actually took down that high, took out that high, and actually came to like go like as in below that high, I already knew that market has already cleared liquidity on. So that now gives me a confirmation that GJ is no longer bullish. GJ is now bearish. Same thing as this high right here. After market took out this high, this liquidity, market actually came and started selling and went down to this side. Same thing as uh this high. Once market took out this high, what did do? Started selling. So each liquidity zone that gets taken out, market will now head to take out the other side of liquidity. So that's why I knew that GJ is not bearish because this last high was taken out and this high is actually liquidity. That's how market took out that high. I know that next thing market should do is now start heading to the other side to clear the other sell side liquidity. That was why I knew that GJ has now become garish. The trade I took on DG, I didn't take a trade on DG. It's breaker block was on BTC, I think. I think I have to flip a small account. What to flip a small account? Take your risk now, risk your account. I don't you know how to calculate lot sizes? The amount of money you have in your account, calculate the lot size equivalent to that account. That if you hit stop loss, you have to lose the account. Then use your lot sizes. It's really as simple as that. There's no chemistry in flipping a small account. Any trade I take, if I hit stop loss, that's when I lose the account. But since my risk to reward ratio is high, if I'm risking $200, it means if I'm targeting 1:6 risk to reward. Okay, this trade I took, for example, is 1:14 risk to reward ratio. This trade I took here is 1:8 risk to reward ratio, and all of them are eating TP. It means if I risk $100 on this trade, I will make $800. If I risk $200, I'll make $1,600. That is literally just flipping an account. You risking a trade calculatively, or you are calculating something, you're taking a risk. That's just it. For the trade on GJ, for the trade on BTC, I took this trade from this breaker block right here. Now, what did I take this trade from this breaker block? Was because there was a break of structure up here, and the first pullback that market made is actually this. This is the first pullback right here. So this is the inducement. You can see this week, this week right here. This is our inducement. There's another block down here, but at the same time, there's a breaker block up here. So the reason I did not pick this other block as my entry was because this breaker block is closest to this inducement that market made right here. That was why I took this trade from this breaker block. And then, as you can see, ETP. I think, let me see if I can find that trade. I don't really remember the trade form. Let me see if I can find it. I think, yeah, it's this trade here. It was this trade, but I caught it very early when it was already moving. It was, let me send it to the comment. It was this trade. Okay. So it was this trade here. So the entry was from the breaker block. I just this you can't see it on this time 45 minutes time frame, but check this time frame that I used to make this analysis. That's when you can see the breaker block clearly. So the entry was it was this trade that played out, this particular trade right here. And this was how I get the entry from the breaker block. Market did the structure sheet. This was the inducement where I'm doing from this zone was the entry. This breaker block right here. This is what my entry was. This breaker block right here. So it's not easy. So you have to pay attention to this is the point of interest that is closest to liquidity. So once there's a structure shift to a break of structure, pay attention to the first pullback, you mark it out. The first pullback indicated the breaker block, you'll be picking your entry from your other block or from the next point of interest. So pay attention to that first pullback. That first pullback is very, very vital to this strategy. That first pullback, wherever the first pullback is, the next point of interest below or above it is what you should be paying attention to. So if there's a breaker here, there's also another breaker here, and then there's another block here. If market does a structure shift, which is something like this, structure shift, and and this is the this is the first pullback here. Sorry. If market does a structure shift, and this is the first pullback here, if it's picking a point of interest, you will pick this breaker block right here. But if market does this a structure shift, and this was the first pullback here, He's picking a point of interest. He will pick this next one here. If market does a shift and the first pullback is here, doing is pulling back again to sweep liquidity. You sweep this liquidity and pick this point of interest. So you have to pick the one that's unmitigated. This one has been mitigated. You move on to the next. But this first one was never mitigated. You're going to pick that first one as your entry. This first one has been mitigated. Pick the second one as your entry. If the second one has been mitigated, you pick it. So just make sure that it obeys these four rules right here. These four rules, structure shift has to have liquidity. This will be unmitigated and has to be the point of interest closest to liquidity. Once you follow these four rules, it will tell you whether to pick your point of interest from a breaker block or whether to pick your point of interest from your other block. That's just it. If the handle of the OB or breaker block is too large, do I go to lower time frames and refine it? Sometimes, but sometimes I just adjust my stop loss to cover the entire other block. Then you just reduce your risk. If the candle of the other block is too large, sometimes I go down to lower, but sometimes even if you go down to lower time frames, you're still not going to see any clear other block. So it's better for you to be safe and then cover up the entire other block and calculate your risk. The breaker block should always start from the body. If the first pullback mitigates the wick of the breaker block, or it does not mitigate the body of the breaker block, you can still use the breaker block. I think I have a scenario on I have a scenario on GJ where the width of the breaker was mitigated, but the body of the breaker was never mitigated. It's still valid to be used as entry. Let me see if I can find that trade. I had this trade. There was a break of structure here. This is the first pullback. The first pullback mitigated the wicks of this breaker block, but the body of the breaker block was never mitigated. So I still use this breaker block as my entry. This was the before, then this was the after. So the breaker block body has to be mitigated, not the wick. It has to be the body of the breaker block, not the wick of the breaker block. Your breaker block needs to have a breaker structure. Yes, now don't I not paying attention to these rules I wrote down. I said it has to trigger a shift in market structure or a breaker structure. That's actually the first rule here. The point of interest has to trigger a breaker structure or a market structure shift. I don't look at fair value gaps. I don't include that in my strategy. Like I said, there's another class. That class will tell you when to set your TP. There are types of liquidity in the market. So we have trendline liquidity, we have equal highs liquidity, all those liquidity. There's long weeks liquidity. Liquidity is what will tell you where to actually put your TP. Because if market takes out liquidity on this zone, that takes out inducement to trigger a point of interest. Clearly, where market is heading to is the other point of is the other liquidity on the other side. Meaning that if market takes out liquidity on this side, it's going to take out liquidity on the other side. Now, how do you know where market is heading to? That is where types of liquidity comes in, and it's going to be in the next class. When we have a weak close and still break of structure, you consider the first pullback as inducement. No, markets. If markets tries to break structure and it's not strong enough for the body to break above that structure and close above it, market has not yet broken structure. You have to wait for the body of the candle to close above that zone. That's when you can consider a proper break of structure, a market structure shift. Is it a must that inducement will come after break of structure, or go back to the first class and the second class? I'm sure I talked about inducement well enough. I even talked about I've defined inducement lots of times. If you pay attention to the definition of inducement, it's already answered this your question. If your inducement will come after the break of structure or before. The definition of inducement alone will answer this your question. I don't think there are other reasonable questions because I'm not seeing other questions relating to what I just thought. So I will send the recording to the Telegram group. I'll send the recording to the Telegram group. Then the next class we'll talk about taking your take profits using liquidity, because take profits, you have to know where market is heading to, and what fuels the market is actually liquidity that fuels the market. So liquidity is taken from this side, it's heading to take liquidity on the other side. So if you know where liquidity is laying in the market, it will give you an idea of where market is going to. So since I had an idea that GJ was going to go and take out that 4 hours high, if I was in a buy before then, I would not be panicking when market is making this tiny pullback, because I know the market is going to take out that high regardless. So I'll hold my trade until that TP. That's why most people will see me holding a trade and there's pullbacks and I'm still holding that trade. They'll tell me, what kind of confidence do you have? I understand liquidity. I know where market is heading to. And since that target has not been met, I know that liquidity has not been taken out from this side. So what's going to cause market to reverse and go against me? If it does, I'll correct myself. But majority of the times, to hold my trade to TP, because I know where market is going to, I know where liquidity is laying in the market. That's just it. How do you consider that a particular BB is a failed one? I said a breaker block is a failed order block. Immediately an order block does not hold, it automatically becomes a breaker block. If you are trying to take a buy from an order block, a buy order block, and then market comes and breaks past it and violates it, that order block we are trying to take a buy from is now a breaker block for us to take a sell. Same thing, if you're trying to take a sell from an order block, a bearish order block, take a sell from it, market comes down, actually breaks past that zone. That order block you're hoping to take a sell from, no longer an order block, but now a breaker block for you to take a buy instead. Want to read about market structure? I think you should read about you should read market structure. You should read Candlestick Bible first. Candlestick Bible will give you an idea of trends. Structure is basically uptrend, downtrend, ranging market. Then break of structure and market structure shift is just when market. Watch the first video. There's really nothing much. Structure shift is when market deviates from the original trend, form a new one. Break of structure is when market breaks a key level in the market. Once you understand support and resistance, you've understood break of structure. Once market breaks a resistance zone, that's a break of structure. If market breaks a support zone, that's a break of structure. Do you understand? If the breaker pushes the market and leaves the OBO mitigated, will market push it? Okay. Now, the only scenario where markets actually come back there is if the TP has not been hit yet. Like if market has not hit your TP, that's if liquidity has not been taken out on the other side. I have an example with GJ. Let me see if I can find it. I have an example with GJ. I have an example with GJ. Let me see if I can find it here. So, I think this is a trade. I took this trade. So with GJ, overall target of GJ, there was liquidity here for market to tap here, liquidity here. So I took this GJ buy right here, and from this breaker block, a market pushed up here, and eventually started reversing. Understand? So when it reversed, it means there was not enough momentum for buyers to push this market to the final TP. So liquidity still needs to be grabbed. So this zone that market used to take a buy from the breaker block the first time, market is now using that zone as liquidity, actually picking a buy from this other block. That's the only way the market can mitigate breaker and still eventually come and mitigate other blocks if the final target has not been met. But in a scenario where price took a buy from this breaker block, and then the buy actually pushed to market to tap this destination that it was heading to. If market comes back to that other block, it will not hold. It will violate it because there's nowhere else for market to buy it to. The only time that market can hold a breaker block and still come back and hold an other block is when market has not hit the final target yet. There was a trade on GJ last week. Let me see if I can find GJ. I know GJ. Last week, I think I took that trade. Um, this trade. This is the inducement. This is our breaker block, and there's another block down here. another block down here. Market picked from this breaker block because this is the inducement and this breaker block is the one that is closest to liquidity. The TP for this trade was here. So when market hit this TP, it started reversing. After reversing, it came here. This other block would not hold market. That was why market came here and actually validated this other block and hit SL from here. Because there was nowhere else for market to go to. The final TP for this trade has already been hit. I think I have, let me see if I have it before. Aha, this was the before. And let's just stop my TP. So this other block no hold. Why? Because the final destination for this trade has already hit. But in a scenario where market actually did this move and the market touched here and then actually went up here, like could not really push market to this final destination and starts coming and then breaks this breaker, this other block can still be used to take a continuation buy to reach him. That's just it. So you only use if the breaker has been tapped and they left the other block unmitigated, it can only use the other block if the final destination of the market has not been tapped yet. If the liquidity on the other side has not been taken, because once market takes out that liquidity, it will clear that your other block. Oh, right. Yeah. So after this, I was seeing the my last second to last trade on GG. It's still from the breaker from the breaker block. This was the second to last trade on GG. This is the breaker block right here. Actually. This is trade. This is where the breaker block is. Market did this because market was in a downtrend, lower highs, lower lows, lower highs, lower lows. Then there was a structure shift that broke past this other block. This other block was what was supposed to push market down. Market came here and broke past it. After breaking past this structure, it made this pullback, which is this inducement right here. So this is where our inducement is. Where our inducement is. So after this inducement was made, market pushed up a bit, then came back, swept that inducement as liquidity. Pay attention, there's another block down here, but there's also a breaker block here. But which point of interest is closest to liquidity? It is this point, it is this breaker block. That was why I took this trade on breaker block on GG. I think I have before it. I didn't really catch it early, but let me see if I have the trade here. What I have here is the MT5 structure of it. So this is it. So this is it. I have the MT5 structure. So pay attention, this was where the entry, this breaker block. This was the MT5 structure for this breaker block trade. That is what this particular trade, right? So that is it. So that's just it on this class. Please, I will send the class. Maybe it's no enter. Let me please the recording. I know I'm going to send it, so there's no point in me recording. Right now, so this is going to be the end of this class. What if the breaker block hits SL and we have the OB? You have to first find out why your trade hits SL. If the breaker block hits SL because it was mitigated before and you're trying to pick the breaker block as entry, yes, you can use the OB. But if your breaker block fails, because market is already changing direction and you're trying to pick from your other block will still fail. If your BB candle is long, put your SL to cover the BB. Please, I'll send the recording to the class. So yeah, I can just watch and any more questions.